And before I even get any deeper in today's conversation, I actually wanted to bring something up that came up again in one of our ambassador meetings just recently, and it will give everybody a very clear picture of exactly what kind of reality we're in per se, and what also is the mysteries behind the soul. And it'll answer many questions that people have about whether it's flat or whether it's round and a lot of different things. But I'm almost reluctant to turn this on only because we did have that little issue with my video, but I'm just going to try it again and see what happens. Let's try this. I'm going to actually leave that on, and actually, let me just put this on this line, and then bam, I'll do it like that and hope that that works out a bit better. Actually, I should have put it on the second line. So what you're looking at is what's known as a Dyson swarm. That's D-Y-S-O-N swarm. And this was a term that came up years ago for me inside of my consciousness when the higher self was explaining to me exactly where we were at and what we were experiencing. And even when I went and looked this up, I wasn't able to really correlate this with what was exactly happening to me in the reality. But through some situations that just occurred recently, something came back to my mind and said, hey, what you're describing is a Dyson swarm. Remember, you saw that picture. So you don't even have to create an illustration. There's already been an illustration created around it, okay? And so I'm just going to explain this really briefly because this is actually a perfect model of the soul. And this is why even the Dyson has sun within it. And it's a hint to that it's the division of the sun. And while these are technical, if not scientific terms, they actually ring true with what goes on in the metaphysical aspects of the creation. So now let's just look at this very briefly. And what we see is we see a sphere. And on the outside of this sphere, there are several dots that are projecting themselves onto the outer edge of the sphere. And then in the center, we have like a central ball of what we could say is the sun, or a coalescing of these dots, okay? So let's just imagine that each of these dots then on the outside connects to one of these rays that you see from the inside, okay? So meaning that each dot would then, and that's the only thing that hasn't been done with this particular drawing. Let me annotate it real quick. Actually, I can do it here. Let's just imagine, let me see the right annotation tool I'm looking for. I think I can use, I think there's a line here. No, we don't want to use that. Let's use this one. It's a line tool. Okay. So let's imagine that this line here, oh, it's not doing it again. Give me a second. If I click text one more time, I'm doing this. Okay. That'll work. That's good. So let's just imagine that this line here, or this dot here, it connects to here. Okay? Let's put in another one. It's through these simple charts that you will come to understand everything. So let's say this dot, it also connects. And all I'm saying here is that every single dot that's on the outer edge, which appears to be individual, actually has a thread or a beam that connects it to the center, okay? And what I'm getting at here is I'm getting at that all of the plants, all the animals, all the insects, including the trees, all the living life forms are functioning in this reality as you see them as if they are separate. Meaning that you think that they're separate, you think that you're separate, but that's not really the case. You're operating as separate, but you're actually a projection of something that is really central or in the center, which today you can say that that is the sun. And it's become, we're seeing things upside down and inside out, so just bear with me here, but the sun that you're seeing in the sky is actually the axis mundi. It is the pillar, and everything is spiraling around it. But because we don't want to see it that way, and also because inside we are not balanced, we see it as that it's going through the sky and then the sun goes down and then it comes back up again. But what's actually happening is the things that are closest to the sun or closest to the soul, including human beings, would actually be following the sun on its journey. And even when the sun went, quote unquote, down here, when the sun went down, you would just go into a state that would be close to the sun yet again. So you would go into the sleep stage and then you would be lucid. But it is the division that we carry on within ourselves. And that's why we say the division is the nemesis. The division that we carry on within ourselves and the division that we've inherited within this reality that often doesn't allow us to be able to see this higher truth. It also is that at the center of each of these balls is where everything is connected. At the center is where this cord, if you may, or beam of light connects every single life form to the center of the soul, which is the sun. Okay, so for you, this center is your navel. Okay, they also call this the nave. It is the center of your consciousness or the center of your being, right? That's also where the dantain is, where you would compress the energy from the crown chakra and the energy from the root chakras and below, and bring them all to the center of self, which actually creates like what you feel like is electricity, but others call it chi, because chi is, in this case, the sun. Okay, so what this does is this, and pay attention here because this gives you a supreme ability, because this is supreme knowledge. So even trees, what you see in the center of the tree, right, is where they are threaded to this central soul. So even humans, where you see the center of the human, which is the navel, which is seen as the umbilical cord, this is where you see the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord is a cognate of this light beam that connects to the soul. So all beings are actually connected to the soul, even if they're actually experiencing themselves as being separate. Now, what this is also called when you're out here on the rims or you're out here on the outer edges of the spheres, is it's actually called wandering. Because you're actually not in the center of yourself. And this is what is being brought us the term called wandering stars. Okay? And now listen to this sound bite real quick here.
Our purpose, to create a star within a star.
So this actually comes from a movie called Sunshine, where they're going out into space and they encounter this other being, and it's all wild, the movie. But that's a soundbite from the movie because they're really stating the true purpose of the divisive reality is to create a star within a star. Basically to make a person or something feel separate inside of something that is already separate, inside of something that is already separate. And that's like a continuous falling down the ladder, versus that's the fall, if you may, versus the awareness that actually nothing is really separate. And to truly climb the ladder, to get away from the fallen aspect of the consciousness, you only need to become aware of how you connect with everything, and how even though there's infinite stars within stars within stars, they're all threaded through the center. And so what this means then, and let's see, oh, wow, it worked. Okay, so what this means is that if you get to the center of yourself, which is the big reward, if you can do it, then you can communicate with all things. Okay, and only those who reach the center of themselves can communicate with all things. So you get people around here and they're like, oh, I want to communicate with animals. Some say they do and they're lying. Some say that they're doing all this incredible stuff and they're lying, because the reality is that if you're not actually centered within yourself, you can't do any of that, because it's only through the center that you can actually accomplish what is omniscience and accomplish what is giving you the ability to actually communicate with everything. Why? Because it's only when things are centered does real communication happen. This is why you generally can't sometimes speak directly to a tree and get an answer back unless you really focus on centering yourself, which happens through the meditation. It happens in different ways. You can begin to at least temporarily center yourself. Sometimes substances temporarily center the being. But of course, what we're looking for is we're looking for that permanent centering. And what that's going to do is it's going to unlock all of these multiverses and all these different spaces. And I think this may be one of the most important things that I brought up in the conversation today about. Again, for even just listeners who don't have the visual of this, just type in Dyson, D-Y-S-O-N, swarm inside of your own computer, and then look at that model and then see what's in the center and identify that as the axis mundi, and identify that as your sun in the sky, and then see that the sun is in the center. And then, of course, this is so factual that if you look at the sun and you're centered, and this could be because you took some substance that centered you, it could be that you took a lot of breaths and that centered centered you, you'll actually see that all of the stuff is spiraling around, including the top of the world, including all the clouds. So what you see is flat, like a two-dimensional image that you're just seeing is actually a sphere. And things are actually spiraling around the center of that sphere, which is like a wheel. And what they're also saying about this, and this being the collective self, is that this is known as the vehicle. Because when you're seated inside this, because you're actually in one now, and that's what's so paradoxical about the reality, because you got a big one, then you got a small one, and you got it ad infinitum, like a fractal. You're actually sitting in this torsion field, if you may, and very similar to how, like, let's say hydroplaning, like not hydroplane, but like a hydrofoil. That's what they call, like a hydrofoil, which is basically that the propulsion of the torus, and there was even a Dyson swarm that actually showed you the connection with this and the torus. But it's basically that here, it is right here. And remember, so I'm pulling you facts here. I'm not pulling anything that I'm actually making up. Because I'm never really making this stuff up. It just comes back to me and just like, yo, it was that. And because we have so much knowledge and we have so much information, it just becomes about what is really relative to what we're dealing with right now. And so when this kind of stuff comes back up, it's like a big aha moment, especially for me, because this makes sense now. Because remember, we have this torus field that's being projected around us as human beings, that we are sitting inside of a torus. And the center of us is where our sun or our soul is. And we're threaded through our own soul to all subsequent souls and the central soul, okay? And however, in this field that is around us, and they say even the planet is configured this way. We don't have to see this as just a planet. It is a complete cosmos that we're actually in now, that inside of this field, your chakras, which are the planets, if you remember and recall properly, is your planets are moving around this field, okay? And this is why it's important to center yourself, because just like anything else, if you have, let's say that this central sun is the brightest light, okay? Just as you're seeing here, it's the brightest light. But what happens if you start following this light right here, okay? I'm just trying to get my screen out. Let's say this is another light right here. This will give you the real truth about what people call extraterrestrials and all that, which I always say have been intraterrestrial, something that is going on inside of us, not external to us, okay? So let's say, for instance, you have one of your organs, and that this is one of your organs. Let me blow this up real quick, because this is important. I may not even have to answer any questions today by just getting this very clear for everyone. Let me see, because there's so many of these diagrams and they all bear witness to the same thing. They're even talking about that there's artificial ones, which I guess I can tie up the conversation with today about the simulation and how the simulation is designed based on the organic Dyson swarm. We're in the organic Dyson swarm now, even though people are trying to convince people that we're in the simulated version. The simulated version is coming, and many will be immersed into it and be tricked into being immersed into it. And that will most likely happen because they believe that they're in it already. And that's kind of like the whole Jedi mind trick that was even practiced by many of the Nazis, which is just convincing you that everybody believes this same thing, and then you start believing it, and then now you're subject to the belief versus do you know? And that's what we're talking about here, because when you know, you go into these spaces, and these spaces show you exactly what they are, and they communicate. And then when you're in the fake ones, or you're seeing the fake ones, then you can see the difference between the real and the fake. Just like anybody can really, in an assessment of character, see the difference between somebody who's keeping it real versus somebody who's a faker. Okay, so now look at this and imagine that one of these balls on the outside, which we'll call the wandering stars, which are cognates of the planets and which are cognates of the organs. Let's say there's a big one, okay? What this would be like for the standard human being would be like that one of their organs is actually more dominant than the other. It's not centralized, it's not balanced. It's acting out as a dominant organ. This could be your spleen, this could be your liver, this could be your heart, this could be your kidney, any of the organs that are trying to convince you that they are the only ones and this is the only way to do things. This is organ or planetary like behavior, but truly there is a central aspect or a central sun to the consciousness. So let's say then now that one of the bigger stars or the bigger lights, that you start to become guided by that light rather than the center. This is what happened with many people with the whole God concept. This is what happened to many people with the guru even concept of bowing down to the gurus. Anything external, those are all the wandering forces. And true enough, some of them are big, some of them are intelligent, and because they're all just partially parts of the complete totality, right? So many have wandered after these false stars, if you may, okay? And what this is like is, let's then imagine that you're a moth, right? And it's nighttime and I turn on the light. When I turn on that light as a moth, you're going to think that that's the sun. So you're going to go and fly towards that LED light. But that is not really the sun. That is not really the center. You've just been convinced that that is because it's giving off this light that looks like the center. They say Venus even had done this. That's why they call Venus Phosphorus, or the false light, the morning star. And again, this is not saying something negative about it. It's showing you where these terms come from, because Venus as a star was so bright that many wandered after that star only and lost the central aspect of themselves. This is why Venus became a cognate also for either Mary or Jesus. Okay, as people wandering off, sometimes even the Lucifer concepts, wandering off, instead of just getting the knowledge, getting the awareness, realizing this is a family member, they have knowledge to give, wandering off and just saying, oh, that's the only thing, or this is what we all should follow. And then what that creates is it creates the being moving away from the center of themselves. Then they began to wander, which it talks about in the Nag Hammadi text. It has one book that you clearly can tell was written by the Mashiach, because there's a certain way that those who have achieved that crystal consciousness speak. And he's referring to the future and saying that what will happen is many will begin to wander after these false stars. So you can see what happens even within Hollywood, because all of us have this configuration of a Dyson swarm, and all of us function individually as planets, that when you get someone that is being basically that they're gassing them up with light and then they're displaying them to you, this could then lead you astray. And that is exactly what we were talking about before, about some of the magic in Hollywood, and even within marketing, and even within this whole sphere that we're in, where so much energy is placed within something that is not the center of who we are. It leads us astray. And that's what these terms mean. No more, no less. Don't harp on it too deeply, but don't think of it lightly. Come into balance with the knowledge and the information and bring all these terms into balance. So I trust that makes sense. But again, you will be able to also use this as a model yourself for exactly how the reality is configured.